April marks Behavioral Health Today's 5th anniversary. To celebrate our 5th year mark, we're releasing 5 shows this week, 1 episode each day. 2 will be new shows, and 3 will be some of our favorites in the past year. We hope you enjoy all of them, both new and old, and we look forward to bringing you another year of trending and relevant content in behavioral and mental health.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. How do you recognize and deal with the anger within yourself? Most tend to avoid it, finding it challenging to feel and tolerate, let alone express it in a productive and generative manner. There are a number of psychological, social, and cultural factors that make the healthy expression of anger difficult. And we know the cost of poorly managed anger can lead to a variety of negative outcomes, both to the individual themselves and to their relationships. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor, and joining me today to discuss anger is Bronwyn Schweigerdt. Bronwyn is a licensed psychotherapist, public speaker, author, and host of the podcast Angry at the Right Things. Known for her evocative therapeutic approach, Bronwyn specializes in helping clients externalize and process deeply buried emotions such as anger and rage. She believes that these intense feelings, when validated and articulated, are crucial for overcoming mental health challenges like depression, anxiety, and even psychosis. By fostering a healthy relationship with anger, she empowers individuals to establish boundaries, enhance self-trust, and break free from dysfunctional patterns. Her belief that sharing trauma with a compassionate listener, making it bearable, underpins her work, aiming to transform isolation into healing and connection. We're excited to have Bronwyn with us today to discuss healthy anger management and resolution, the benefits of processing intense emotion, and the practical strategies for developing a healthier relationship with anger. Bronwyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's really nice to have you. Well, so Bronwyn, of all the psychological and interpersonal areas that you could have specialized in, why anger?
Yeah, I love that question. I would say I chose anger because I feel like it is the most misunderstood emotion, not just among lay people, but even the therapeutic community. And that's been my experience. I mean, I became a therapist myself. This is a second career later in life because I desperately needed a good therapist and I couldn't find one. And I was very, very depressed at the time. I believe all depression is a result of suppressed anger or what I call disassociated anger.
Yeah.
Looking back, I see that that was true for me now. And I needed a good therapist who could kind of just give me a framework to understand like what is going on with me? Why do I feel like I'm going crazy? And I couldn't find one. So part of my coming out of that depressive episode was going back to school and getting another master's in counseling psychology and becoming the therapist that I needed for myself at the time, because I would go and sit in the chair in the office of these therapists. And I remember thinking to myself, Bronwyn, you are hardly functional right now, but I still think you'd make a better therapist to yourself than this person.
You weren't too impressed with the folks you were seeing.
I really wasn't. So I view a good therapist or a good friend or a good partner as a mirror, a good mirror, giving you a true reflection of yourself so that you can start understanding yourself.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is going to be understanding, why am I depressed? And like I said, I believe depression is, Freud said it's anger turned inward. So I call it disassociated anger. Same with anxiety. It's exactly the same phenomenon. The same with, mania, psychosis. I believe all of the mood disorders, all the mental health illnesses that we call mood disorders are a result of suppressed or dissociated anger. And a lot of therapists are like, wait, you need to forgive that person or let me advocate for this person that I've never met, but I'm going to take their side. And it's like so invalidating. I think a lot of therapists are afraid of anger. They think, and I think this is, a human trait in general, but we kind of think, oh, if I validate, the anger is just going to get bigger and it's going to take over and then they're going to murder that person. And the truth couldn't be actually more contrary because it's so counterintuitive. But when we feel heard, when we feel validated, whew, now we have expressed or externalized that anger out of our bodies. And now we're calming down. We're going from the limbic brain to the prefrontal cortex, and we're able to now think rationally. So when I'm processing my anger with you, Graham, and I'm saying, I can't believe my boss said that. And you're like, yeah, I don't blame you for being angry, Bronwyn. Well, once I feel validated, I feel heard, I'm able to now finally enter my prefrontal cortex and think more objectively and go, yeah, now when I think about it, I kind of see why he did what he did. And we can't do that. We can't enter our prefrontal cortex when we're stuck in the anger. And so what we need other people to do for us is to help us feel heard and validated so that now we can think objectively and rationally for ourselves. We don't need that other person to do that for us, which unfortunately is what most other people think their job is to do. Does that make sense?
That makes great sense. And I want to come back a little bit later in the podcast and talk about how you take folks to that place
Mhm,
and how, as a therapist, you're facilitating something that you're saying, boy, I wish I had earlier on,
mhm,
and how essential that joining is, the validation is, at times the normalization of things that are going on,
mhm.
and to maybe help people understand that that anger is something of importance. It's hard. It's challenging to express anger. We don't have good role models of it sometimes, and we don't even know what you're saying. I think most interestingly is we don't even know how to identify it sometimes and really what it could be underneath. So let's do something here. When we talk about anger, what are we referring to with this, emotion labeled anger? What is it?
Yeah, good question. So we consider in the therapeutic realm, we consider anger to be a secondary emotion, not a primary. I would say what is under the anger is some form of feeling betrayed or rejected. And so that's why, we can all get angry at the person who cuts us off on the freeway. And very few people have a hard time expressing that anger because we don't know this person who cut us off and we don't have much of an expectation on them. But when it's a parent who is betraying us,
Right.
or it's a partner who's rejecting us, or a good friend, then that's when we're going to disassociate from those feelings because those are hard to admit. It's hard to admit that anger. We're afraid we're going to lose the relationship, which we could. It depends on who those people are, right? And so that's when we get afraid and we feel we invalidate ourselves. And so we start to disassociate from this
Right.
anger. And I view anger as a light on the dashboard of our car saying, check under the hood. Something is wrong. So if we can move from it's evil, it's shameful, it's bad, or move away from that it always means exploding and being volatile because it doesn't have to whatsoever. And
Right.
if we get away from that and go, it's just a warning light saying there's something wrong that needs to be repaired. And I can choose how I do that. I don't have to explode. In fact, the people who do explode are usually the ones who have suppressed their anger for a very, very long time. And so they haven't learned to be responsible with their anger in the moment. And now they're exploding. So if I can just say, you know what? I'm feeling kind of angry and I can just let
Mhm.
myself feel it in my body.
Mhm.
I can just start there and I can validate it myself and go, you know what? Yeah, of course you feel angry because he said he would do this and he didn't. And that's
Yeah.
okay. That's a betrayal of sorts. And now I can learn to channel that anger out of my body through, there's basically three means: assertive speech. So I can say, Graham, you said we were going to get on this call at 11. I'm looking at my watch. It's like 11:20. This is a pattern. I'm really frustrated with this. What's going on? So that would be assertiveness. I'm not exploding. I'm not attacking. A boundary. There's some people who are unsafe people to be assertive with.
Mm.
If you're not a safe person, I'm not going to put myself in jeopardy and confront you or be assertive. I'm just going to have a big, huge boundary and say, well, I'm not going to work with Graham anymore. Right.
Mhm.
And maybe you're my boss and maybe I can't afford to lose my job. So I can't do those first two things. I'm going to seek accountability. So maybe I'm going to start to document all the times this happens and I'm going to go to HR or I'm going to go above Graham's head and I'm going to seek some kind of accountability. So those are mainly the three things we can do.
I think those are good. I think as you're leading into these, the idea that anger is primarily, a secondary emotion. I think there's a place for sure for righteous anger, righteous indignation, righteous anger when something really
Definitely.
truly fits.
Yeah.
But the idea of not naming it properly misses out on really working through and appreciating what might be deeper in that. It could be, like you said, betrayal and rejection. It can be a hurt. It can be a
Yeah.
sadness. It can be a disappointment
Mm.
that is, like you're saying, very, very hard to sit with. It's easier and more empowering, more energetic, gives me something to do when I'm angry because I feel
Yeah.
like I got some power in that. But it's really about, like what you said, it's harder to sit more closer to the heart
Mm.
of, man, that really disappointed me. That really hurt me.
Yes.
And we also, have a hard time with too is that requires a different level of sophistication and communication skills. And I think what you're inferring here is the ability to identify that that's exactly what it is. Women tend to internalize, their
Mm.
anger. Men tend to more act it out, just being, gender fluid right there. But the idea that that's what we tend to do. Men can do it too. Men have depression that way. But things get manifest in different ways. But the idea of identifying maybe the anger is just like that, like you're saying, that warning light. And maybe there's something really important under the hood
Yes.
that we can really say, hey, what might that really be about? And it's interesting, I think, and I'm curious about your experience of this. When you begin to kind of dip down a little bit, although it might be hard and challenging initially, there can be a softening that begins to happen when someone kind of huddles up and huddles around. I think this really might be about, like you're saying,
Mm.
a rejection,
Mm.
betrayal, a deep hurt, sadness,
Yes.
something being
Yeah.
triggered for me.
Yes.
Almost like a softening that takes place and almost an entry into that something in a
Mhm.
whole new way.
Mhm.
Say more about that.
Yes. So that's great. So I'm hearing you kind of name some self awareness, which is really what you're getting at. Like for us to be self aware, like, why am I angry? What's under the
Mm,
hood here? What's going on? And I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, my daughter doesn't live at home anymore. She's 20, but a few years ago, she was still living at home. I went downstairs between clients to get lunch. She was in the kitchen at the same time as me. And I asked her some questions about her life, her day, and she didn't want to answer them like many daughters do or don't. And I got really angry with her.
mm,
And we ended up getting in a fight. And a couple hours later, I was able to just to sit and reflect. And I think, there's a lot of talk about meditation. I'm not a big meditation fan. I'm more of a reflection fan. Like, let's reflect. Like, 'cause I just reflected on our whole fight, especially the beginning of it, and during that time, as painful as it was to see myself and reflect on myself and my own contribution, I learned I have this pattern when I'm with another person that I cannot tolerate silence in the presence of another person, and I started seeing this is a pattern. This didn't just start and end with my daughter. This has been my whole life. In fact, I think it's why I became a therapist because what I'll do in the presence of another person is I'll ask them a lot of questions so I don't have to have silence that's so triggering to me. So I started realizing, okay, that's my trigger. I
mm,
am triggered because it feels like rejection. And that's because of my own, early childhood and being with my
mm,
mother and how silent that was and how it felt like very rejecting, which it was. And so I got all this self awareness and I was able to tell my daughter, you know, that's my trigger. And
mm,
I am responsible for my trigger, not you. And if I'm uncomfortable with silence because you don't want to talk to me, that's a me problem, and I'm
mm,
sorry for making that a you problem. And so I had all this self-awareness. I realized, this shows up for me all the time. And now when I start feeling uncomfortable, I'm able to do self-talk to little Bronwyn and say, it's okay. This person's just silent. They're not rejecting you. Or you know what? If they are rejecting you, that's a them problem, not a you
mm,
problem.
mm. Wow, I love that process. I think that's a being personally responsible for ourselves, but also responsible in a relationship to say, if I have this trigger with you, if something gets elicited here, that's probably telling me something. And let me start rather than make it, I was thinking every relationship, whether it's a partner, a marriage, a friendship, whatever it may be, there's always two eyes and a we, and you're saying with your daughter in the kitchen, you're kind of going back and forth up here in the we, and you said rather than, continue to point at each other, you went down to the I, to yourself, and you said, what is going on with me in a self-reflective way
Mhm.
that I think is such a cool promise in a relationship. It gets to say, hey, when you and I are having a little bit of beef here, we're having a hard time. I'm going to start with myself first.
Yeah.
I'm not going to start, lob things to you. And maybe I am angered by something, and maybe something is triggering me that looks like anger, but really maybe it's something about I don't like silences,
Mm.
or maybe I don't like the way that that felt, and maybe that predates you. And if I
Mm.
take it out on you right now, you and I are not going to go anywhere, and I'm not going to grow anywhere.
Mhm.
And you're kind of being responsible in that way. But I think that's a wonderful first step of just kind of pausing, like you're saying, and going back and kind of reflecting. It's hard
Mhm.
because I think what you said earlier too, there's some misconceptions that people have around anger, whether it's, if you talk about it, it's almost like if you talk about sex and drugs to your kids, they're going to go out and have sex and use drugs. And the opposite shows true.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with anger. We feel like, well, if we open up this can of worms, people are just going to lose it. And the opposite is true. Funny enough,
Yeah.
it's a paradoxical thing. And you're saying this misconception is if we can get people to kind of start leaning into it and be curious, the way that you kind of have a nice, elegant way of doing it, of what's underneath that.
Mm.
And you talk about the importance of processing and externalizing these emotions like anger.
Mhm.
I think that's a very nice invitation to say, huh, I wonder if that's really the emotion. And you're talking about going from that part that's got the fight or flight kicked up and we're ready to
Mm.
fight to, wait a minute,
Mm.
let's just kind of calm it down first. Talk about the process that you use in that to help folks
Mm.
slow it down, calm
Mhm.
down,
Mm.
get curious about it and how you join them in doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So again, you said a good phrase, moving toward the feelings instead of away. So
Mhm.
everything is paradoxical here. Everything is counterintuitive.
Yeah.
So I just recently, a few days ago, had a client get really angry with me, which is, it's easy to validate her anger at her husband, but at
Yeah.
me, man, that's where you're talking about the rubber meets the road, right? And so, yeah, she was angry with me, and I won't get into it, but I heard her out and I just said, "Yeah, I can see why. I can see why you felt actually betrayed." It was in her instance, I had to report something to CPS and she felt betrayed. And I didn't deny it, even though she signed, the liability forms that, for what is confidentiality, the limits of confidentiality. But I also know she doesn't remember signing those. That was a long
Sure.
time ago. So I said, I get it. I bet you feel betrayed. And I also I imagine that this is really scary what you're going through, and I just validated everything she's saying. It's empathy.
Yes.
Empathy, it's leaving ourselves and through our imagination, we put ourselves in that other person's shoes. And if we don't engage the imagination, we can't do it. It's not I don't relate to your feelings, so I can't empathize. It's like, well, I'm going to relate because I can only imagine what it's like having a CPS worker come to your home. And
Yeah.
wow, that would be super hard. Yeah, I will validate your anger.
Mhm.
And so we had like a few interchanges and it really helped her, just feel. And I said, you are welcome. I respect your feelings. If you want to reach out to me in the future, that's awesome. If you don't, I honor that. And so
Yeah.
I think it's really honoring and using that empathy to leave and stop defending ourselves and really be with that person in their feelings.
That's really good. I know that the research shows that if we can work through, that kind of what we might refer to as negative, transference in those moments, the therapeutic relationship has a really awesome opportunity, I think, in life as well, to
Yes.
really be much stronger than had we not had something like that. Funny enough, it's how we, have
Yeah.
traversed through the difficult times and how we knit something together, even in a stronger way. But I also appreciate that for her to bring this up with you, and I think this is can maybe a larger meaning here possibly is for her to bring that up with you, she had to really trust you
Mm.
to know that somehow you were going to show up in a way because there's all kinds of challenges around expression, of anger, our social norms and our conditioning and our fear of the consequences. She's going to get angry at me, this therapist, and fire me.
Mhm.
Also, how am I looking as I express my anger? Or maybe I don't have the skills to do it, but for her to be able to bring that up tells me there was a great level of trust
Yeah.
between the two of you, which is a huge piece, I think, that it's also part of the
Mhm.
therapeutic relationship, that people get to see that, hey, maybe I can't do this in my life, but maybe in therapy I can.
Mm.
But what I know too, though, Bronwyn, is that anger and its underlying ancillary emotions, they're not fun emotions for me to fear. Excuse me, to feel. Well, to fear, funny enough, that's a slip. But to feel, let
Yeah.
alone bring them to a conversation level with you as my therapist and talk about,
Yeah.
isn't it going to be difficult for me? And I can't help but believe that it's going to be really uncomfortable process for me doing that with you, and yet you're asking me to lean into it.
Yeah. So I think most people are afraid of anger and being assertive because they were not validated as children and they felt
Yes.
rejected or abandoned by their parents. So
Yeah.
age 2 is like the first stage of differentiation.
Yeah.
And, very few of us remember being 2, but we can kind of just all infer that we rejected our parents and we said no and we said mine and
That's
me do
right.
it. And if our parent didn't respond well, which is probably 99.99% of parents, and I'm pretty sure I did a bad job as well with my daughter when she was 2. If that parent responded by silent treatment, by even just looking away, by yelling, by getting
Yeah.
angry at us, those are implicit imprints on our little
Yes.
brain that
Yes.
says anger is scary. When you have boundaries with someone, it's scary because they will reject you or they will get angry at you or they will go MIA. And so that is what we carry with us into adulthood. And so we are afraid of anger oftentimes.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Most of us spend more time at work than anywhere else doing anything else. So why not spend that time in a job you love? Introducing Triad's Jobs Marketplace, the only job site dedicated specifically to behavioral and mental health professionals. Featuring more than 1,000 open jobs from dozens of behavioral and mental health employers, and searchable by location, professional field, employment type, specialization, and more. Jobs Marketplace helps you find your next career opportunity. Full-time, part-time, or gig time, make the most of your time. To access Jobs Marketplace, register for your free professional account at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT, and then click to Jobs Marketplace. If you're already a member of the Triad community, visit app.hellotriad.com/jobs. That's app.hellotriad.com/jobs. Visit us today and take your next career step tomorrow.
When you put it like that, it's such a normalizing thing. It's not a pathological model you're talking about here. It's a relational model.
Mhm.
And you're saying, of course you'd have a hard time with anger. Of course you'd have maybe a hard time with some communication skills because in your family, you couldn't share these things. And little girl, you little boy, you couldn't say no when I'm 2 or 3 years old, or differentiate in that way because it could be rejected. It could be angry. They could shut it down. And so
Mhm.
anger or the expression of things doesn't become safe. And
That's
what
right.
happens to that as well, like you're saying, I think it's so true. We have a developmental arrest in some ways around
Mhm.
the development of necessary communication skills. How do I share with you that I'm upset about something? How do I draw a boundary, or how do I have assertive speech, or how do I have accountability? The three things you talked about earlier. I don't develop those in my family if I'm told to, kind of sublimate or deny or avoid my anger.
Mhm.
And what you're saying here is, let's try and maybe do a do-over in therapy. Let's find a way to bring the anger that you couldn't bring into your family into our work together here.
Yeah.
Very, very different.
Yeah. So what you're talking about, people who go that route, we call those codependents. And they
Mhm.
learn as an infant, as a toddler, that they are responsible for mom and dad's feelings. And they
Exactly.
will carry that belief implicitly with them through the rest of their lives. And so what they unfortunately do is codependents feel responsible for everyone else's feelings and especially anger. They really want to keep people happy. What they don't do is ever feel responsible for their feelings.
Yes.
And what they don't do is even know they have feelings because they are so dissociative because you cannot feel responsible for anyone else's feelings and simultaneously feel responsible for your own. It's just impossible. It's actually impossible to be responsible for anyone else's feelings. I always tell my clients, you can feel like you are responsible for someone else's feelings, but you will die trying. Good
Yeah,
luck.
I've often said, you know, you're not that powerful.
Yeah.
You're just not.
Yep.
And you can't be. It's impossible. You're not that powerful. It's kind of a little bit of a relief. But you talk about also that if we don't express anger in healthy ways, we're going to express it in more toxic ways at times, either within ourselves or maybe relationally. What do you see the cost
Mhm.
of unexpressed in a healthy way anger being, both maybe for women, for men, in
Yeah.
terms of the kind of the potential toxicity of it?
Well, with codependents, they are perpetually anxious and they'll come to me usually
Mhm.
when the anxiety has gotten so debilitating, but they'll tell me, yeah, I've pretty much been anxious my whole life. And I'm like,
Yes.
yeah, because you've always felt responsible for other people's feelings. You have all this anger and resentment you're carrying around that you are not being responsible for channeling out of your body into healthy ways. So that
Yes.
makes complete sense. But depression, I did have a client, I like to brag about her. She had psychosis actually, which
Mm.
she's the one and only client I've had with that, where she had hallucinations from time to time that were really debilitating, not fun, very scary. And, from the first session, I was like, it sounds like you have a horrible mother. And she's like, I can see that. And I'm like, well, if you don't, I'm going to. Like, how like, I wanna kill her right now, what you're telling me. So, she just sounds like an absolute, monster.
Mm.
And once she started getting to the place where she's like, "Yeah, my mother is a monster and I need to have boundaries," and she created some very, going no contact, basically, boundaries with her. She was able to, I mean, her hallucinations completely stopped, and she was on so many medications for those for so many years.
That is a phenomenal story. You've used the word dissociation several times today. Psychosis,
Mhm,
and we dissociate. Those are all under the defense mechanisms, aren't they? They are ways that we avoid the anxiety of true feelings or experiences in order to manage. And
mhm,
some people, interestingly enough, go all the way to dissociation, derealization, psychosis.
mhm,
Those are
mhm,
ultimately, like you're inferring here, which I think is brilliant, Bronwyn, is those are coping strategies. Those are
mhm,
ways for me not to have to address
mhm.
these strong feelings that I don't know what to do with, that will annihilate me probably if I do. And what you're doing right there, right out of the gate, is saying, well, that makes sense to me. Of course you do this. What? And this was how your mom was. Wait, 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 time out. I can say that. And so when someone begins to incorporate that, they don't need to defend anymore. And they begin to reorganize. They move
Yeah.
out of kind of a psychotic state that, in order, which is to cope. We don't think about it that way, but you do, I think, brilliantly.
Mhm.
And they get to move up the, ladder of maturity and sophistication and psychological organization.
Yeah.
Huge.
Huge. Yeah, I actually have another great story. My daughter, so I really hurt her. So when I talked about me myself needing a therapist, that was about maybe 16 years ago now. I fell into a very steep depression. And at that time, she was almost 6. She felt very much rejected by me. And if you've been around someone who's depressed, it's like they're in a black hole. And I was. And so she personally, because she was so young, felt shame, like I rejected her and that was her shameful,
Yeah.
her being shameful some way. So I just kind of figured all this out in the last few years, kind of connecting these dots. And I went and spoke to her about a year and a half ago. And I said, you know what? Her name is Edie. I said, Edie, what I want little 5-year-old Edie to know is that when she felt rejected by her mother,
Mm,
that was 100% a mom problem and 0% a
mm,
little Edie problem.
mhm.
And from that pretty much day on, this is so crazy. This is the craziest story. So going back, when she was 5 and this happened, she started out of nowhere having almost daily headache and stomach aches for 14 years.
Okay.
Almost daily. And I was a nutritionist at the time, and I'm like, "This makes no sense. Nothing's
Mm,
changed. I tried all these things." She also had very high anxiety those 14 years.
Mm.
When I let her know that was 100% a mom problem and 0% a little Edie problem, her anxiety completely diminished.
Mm.
Her headaches and stomach aches completely stopped. She is like a different person physically as well as emotionally now. And I know that was all a result of her shame and her suppressed anger at me.
What a reminder, though, Bronwyn, that our anger, when not expressed, or when it comes out sideways, maybe in a depression or otherwise,
Yeah.
it truly does have physical health effects and also
Yeah.
relational effects, doesn't it? What do you see some of those things being in addition to what you're talking about with your daughter Edie? What other kind of
Yeah.
manifestations do you see play out in folks' lives?
Migraines are big, digestive issues,
Yep.
very big. I mean, I would have never said this a few years ago, but honestly, even things like, major irritable bowel disorder
Yeah.
or
IBS.
inflammatory
Yeah.
bowel disorder, yeah, diverticulitis,
Yeah.
even things like Crohn's, things like
Mm.
even celiac, I would say all of those I believe are that's so our gut is where we hold disgust and betrayal.
Yes.
And shame is a form of self-disgust. So
Mhm.
that's where we carry those things. So we have a lot of gut issues. And then the other things I see are, ADD, ADHD. I see autoimmune disorders, insomnia. I myself had insomnia on and off, but a lot of on over about 30 years. It's just been a few years since I've ended my insomnia bouts. And I see that as my body communicating to me that I was betraying her by continuing to have a relationship with my father, of being in denial of how abusive he is towards me. Because I was so wanting his approval of me that I was willing just to, neglect and overlook
Sure.
actually how abusive he was.
Yeah.
And so once I came to terms with like, oh my God, he is so abusive.
Mm.
I don't need his approval anymore. I gave myself that approval. I was able to cut him out unless he apologizes, which has yet to happen. And I've been sleeping like a baby now for the first time in over 30 years.
That's so good. What I love that you do and you're encouraging, and I hope our listeners so appreciate this piece. We are in a society that medicates everything.
Yeah.
I did a podcast with a guy a little while back that deals with diabetes type 2. And he was talking about, when people have diabetes, they take it or they find out they're, pre-diabetic or they become diabetic and they go to their doctor. They say, well, that's okay. We're going to be able to manage this with you. And here's the medication you'll take. Here's the shots you'll take. Here's how you monitor it. Here's how you prick your finger or do the computer measuring thing. But no one ever says, well, would you like to stop the diabetes? Would you like it to discontinue? Because if it's type 2, more times than not, we can probably do some things to change it. Same theme here is what you're
Yeah.
saying is, okay, so I'm angry, or so I have, psychosis, or I have, irritable bowel, I have insomnia. You're not prescribing Ambien. You're not saying, well, let's find out the newest IBS medication in a long-term way, maybe in a short-term way, yes. But what you're doing instead is you're getting underneath and saying, what might be an underlying explanation for this that we can resolve? And when we resolve, we don't have to introduce anything into our bodies unnecessarily. That just perpetuate what's underneath not being recognized.
Yeah.
You really you like to get down because I believe what you're inferring to is that our feelings get stored in our bodies
Yes.
and our body holds a trauma, all these things, and it
Mm.
comes out sideways, but we think it's a symptom. Let's go treat it medically. No, let's start with maybe some of the psychological aspects of it, which I love being an emphasis on your part.
Yeah. I actually believe our body is speaking to us. I believe that's how we connect with our inner child is through our body. We start to attune, we
Yeah.
start to listen. Like, ooh, I'm feeling what is going on with my gut? Is this shame? Is this disgust? What's going on? Am I feeling betrayed by someone? I have people where their posture's always kind of like, their shoulders are slumped forward. Why am I in pain and why am I always in this posture? Why am I, it's like a shameful posture or like they feel
Yeah.
oppressed by something. Like I believe our bodies are actually always speaking to us, which is our inner child speaking to us, saying,
Yeah.
Attune to me. Stop betraying me. Listen to
Right.
me.
We'll talk about that then. So if all these things in fact are true, and someone's looking to go into therapy to understand maybe my posture is representative of something more, maybe my IBS is representative of something deeper.
Mhm.
Talk about the role of the therapist. And for those maybe going into therapy around some of these feelings and emotions we're talking about today, what's the role of the therapist in this supportive therapeutic relationship, processing a myriad of feelings, including anger? And what makes for a good therapist is somebody who's going to go say, "Hey, okay, I listened to Bronwyn, and these are some of the things she's saying."
Mhm.
How would someone know?
Yeah. So a good therapist, like I said, the beginning is a good mirror, giving you a true reflection of yourself, who has a good paradigm where things start making sense and you start seeing patterns in yourself, in others. And you're like, oh, this makes sense.
Mm,
So a good therapist is someone who listens like their life depends on it and then asks really good questions to go deeper, deeper, deeper. I use somatic theory, which we've talked about our bodies and all that. But attachment theory is the only theory that makes any sense of things. It's how our inner child learns these delusions, that learn
yes,
these beliefs that are faulty. And the only way we can unlearn them is going back to the root, to the
yes,
imprint of when we learn them. And I lead my clients in what I call integration exercises, where their adult self imagines going to that little 4-year-old Graham and having it in and validating how he felt and telling him, you know what? Here's what's true. Here's what I need you to see now. Here's what you didn't know then. And and so integrating. So I do all this on my podcast for people who will never be my personal clients. So I have a
yes.
co-host. Her name's Katie. She's actually my best friend. She's not a therapist. But I do all these exercises on her so that the listeners can do them for themselves. So my
Very cool.
goal is to help therapists learn if they're interested in listening to my podcast so they can do them with their clients. But also, if someone wants to kind of bypass therapy or like do work with their therapist and then do work on their own, my goal is to help them to do that. And so we can use the therapeutic process, but also do these things and be empowered to do them for ourselves.
That's very cool. In addition to folks being able to connect with you on your podcast, which we'll talk about before we wind down today, I want to come back and talk with you maybe in another show about some of the strategies and techniques that you recommend you walk people through so people can get a real sense of how you move, like you said earlier, from recognizing our triggers to being emotionally aroused, around anger or some really strong things, and how you move people to a place of kind of turning on that parasympathetic nervous system and getting them from that part of the brain to the part of the brain that can more
Mhm.
thoroughly look at and assess what's going on and then lean into in a safer way. So maybe we can flag coming back together to do a show on that piece. 'Cause I love
Yeah.
we do a clinician series and it kind of walks people through these things and kind of behind the proverbial therapy door to see, well, how do you do that? If I was coming to therapy with you, what would we be doing? What would I
Mm,
expect? Let's
yeah.
talk about, we're going to be kind of winding down here in just a couple minutes, but let's flip it just a wee bit and say, when you see folks being able to utilize their anger and the curiosity around it and the interest that you kind of have along with them in kind of a co-shared way with this curiosity, where do you see people coming in with anger initially being able to grow out of it? Give me a story around, hey, someone came in and just, oh my, but when we came out, this is what this person was able to do with their anger that leads to growth.
Yeah. Yeah, so I view it's our relationship to our anger as we heal our relationship to our anger, we actually heal our relationship with ourselves because we stop betraying ourselves. We start having empathy for ourselves and we start self-nurturing,
Why is
really.
it a self-betrayal?
Because when we invalidate our own feelings, when we don't do right by ourselves, when we don't advocate for ourselves, we're betraying ourselves.
Yeah, like that.
And You know, I guess there was probably a point in my life where I would have said, "Oh, you know, being true to yourself, that sounds selfish. And now I'm like, wow, being true to yourself is not selfish, because when we start being true to ourselves,
That's
we
right.
flourish. We flourish like a beautiful tree, like, a mature tree. And we flourish in the world, and we create habitat and shade and fruit, just like a beautiful mature tree for
Hmm.
all of these other animals and creatures, and for the soil and all these things. And so us being true to ourselves really benefits, and us flourishing benefits the whole world. There will be people who are threatened by that. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of people who are threatened by that, who'd rather have us be a little sapling our whole life and never flourish. But you know what? That's a them problem. Like, let's not let them win.
I
Let's
love,
let's go ahead and flourish, no
I
matter
love that.
who doesn't like it.
True to yourself. That's a phrase sometimes we kind of hear tossed around, but if we can do that, there's a certain responsibility that I hear you almost advocating. We've got to be responsible for ourselves. We get dinged up and banged up in our upbringings, and we're raised by imperfect parents. I've got three parents. I got three kids, and I'm an imperfect parent.
Yeah.
But we're responsible for ourselves in our adult years to bang out some of the dings and dents that we've gotten to live our fullest, most intended life. And when you talk about being true to yourself, I don't see that as selfish either. In fact, I think if you don't do that, then you are being selfish. Selfish is
Mm,
I do something for my sake
mm,
and you pay a price, basically. So if I deny leaning into the things I need to
mm,
lean into and take responsibility for, like you're saying, then I'm
mm,
being selfish because I don't want to feel it. I don't want to deal with it.
mm,
And then you're paying a cost because I come off as gnarly, I come off as hurtful, I become
mm.
neglectful.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you talk about this, it's really not selfish, it's self-care.
Mhm.
And I'm in my self-care, I'm being responsible, and actually others benefit, like you talked about with your daughter Edie. When I'm responsible for myself, that's self-care, so I can work through this, and actually she benefits secondarily. That's a
Yeah.
cool part of this. I love that, Bronwyn. So, hey, as we wind down, give our listeners a takeaway, maybe just one thing they could do to maybe if they're experiencing some anger, or they think they might be. What's one thing they could do just to kind of get more curious about it, or maybe kind of
Mhm.
lean into it today?
Yeah, I would say just let's start seeing it as that light on the dashboard saying, hey, something is off. I'm not going to explode. I don't need to explode. It's not dangerous. But let's look under the hood and bring about resolution. That's really the end goal, is resolution.
I like that. So be aware of the dashboard light and maybe hold this idea that maybe it's not dangerous. Maybe it's okay. Maybe there's something there that's got a deeper meaning. I love it.
Well,
Hey, as
maybe
we
your anger is really valid.
go back to the righteous anger. Yeah, maybe you get to own that. And maybe some lines were crossed or things done that genuinely need to be processed in a truly righteous, angered, righteously indignant way. Let's go
Yeah.
do it that way too. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it. Well, as we wind down, Bronwyn, today, I would love for our listeners to be able to follow up and learn more about you, including your podcast, Angry at the Right Things, as well as other things you're doing. How can they do so and follow up with you after our show?
Yeah. So please subscribe to my podcast. That's what it's for, is to help people subvert all the mistakes I've made and learn from my mistakes. Yeah. So Angry at the Right Things. I have about 22 episodes of me and my co-host Katie talking
Nice.
about all of this, unpacking it, and doing these integration exercises. I also have a shame exercise that I have her do, that we give the shame away back to the original owner. And it is, I'm going to say, life changing. It certainly changed my own life.
Oh, good. Give us a URL that we're going to put on our site anyway, but give us one just auditorily here.
Yes, it's angryatherightthings.podbean.com.
Perfect. Well, in addition to that URL that you gave us, Bronwyn, I know that folks can also find your podcast on their favorite podcatcher. And we're going to put that on our site as well when we have the show produced and ready to go. So, hey, we're going to have you back. This is a really enjoyable conversation. We'd love to take our listeners in the next show, maybe behind the proverbial therapy door, and find out, what am I doing and what could I be doing in my life to lean into this. So we'll have you back. But for today, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Graham. It was really, really fun.
It really was fun. I also want to thank you, our listeners, for dropping by and joining Bronwyn and me today. It's always great to have you with us as well. Regarding our episode, I want to remind you that it and its resources and all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. Thanks again for being with us on the show, and we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.